What's happening, guys? This is Mike at Mike's Little Dragon Channel, and tonight I would like to talk about one of the most memorable standalone issues, not only for Spider-Man, but for Marvel, DC in general. This is called The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. This issue came out in 1984. Now, you don't see that much nowadays, these type of standalone stories. They were a lot more prevalent back in the day. For those of you who, if you're confused or whatever, a standalone story is which it's not a part of any type of storyline. It is kind of a issue. I don't want to call it a fill-in. Some people like to call them fill-ins, but it's an issue in which you get a lot of downtime with your characters, and those issues make for a lot of great interaction, character development, really good, memorable moments of, just exploring the characters, exploring their personalities and traits. So you used to get that a lot, very frequently back in the day. Now, with the way stories are written, everything is just go, 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 go. Storyline, 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 event. A lot of people call it writing for trade. Everything happens in 6 or 8 issue chunks, and you don't get those one-offs storylines where people just kind of have downtime. This issue of Spider-Man has 2 of those stories in there. And you see right here on the cover, the kid is putting up a poster of Spider-Man fighting Thunderball, who's a member of the Wrecking Crew. So we open up, and this story here, there's 2 stories in it. The first one is And He Strikes Like a Thunderball. That's the first story. It has Spider-Man fighting this guy here, Thunderball. He's a member of the Wrecking Crew. They're basically bank robbing type supervillains. Their whole thing is they're not the psychopaths like the Green Goblin or the Joker is. They basically just do stuff for money. But this story here is really the secondary, or even though it's the first story, it's not the one that's the most well known in this book. The one that's most well known is the story that follows after this. So this book has 2 stories in there, and this is the first one. So you've got this next one here, and this is the one here that is the most famous. And it's called The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. And as you see here, this is a news segment. This guy here, his name is Jacob Conover, and he has a section of the newspaper, which you can see, this is like a clipping, Conover's Corner. And he starts off here, Timothy Harrison is one of those special young men. He's sharp, bright, likable, and 9 years old, going on 35. You know the kind I mean. You talk to him for 5 minutes, and you get the odd feeling that he's already been around the track a few times, despite his youthful appearance. Tim is like a lot of other kids. He's seen all the Star Wars movies about a dozen times each. He's a big Mets fan, and he enjoys whatever music that's passing for music these days. What makes Tim different from most of his classmates is that he has a hobby of which J. Jonah Jameson, this newspaper's esteemed publisher, would certainly not approve of. Tim collects Spider-Man. So basically what we see is Spider-Man shows up to this kid's house. And this story here is very, when I talk about one-off stories, this is a prime example of it. Great moments here. Spider-Man shows up to meet this kid. The kid here, he can't believe that it's Spider-Man. He's an incredibly huge Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man appears in his room, tells him that he's Spider-Man, shows him lifting the bed up. We get a little bit, we basically get the gist of this story through these little excerpts. from the newspaper article. It says, Tim has a huge old trunk filled with Spider-Man memorabilia. There are 8 big scrapbooks overflowing with magazine and newspaper clippings, kinetoscopes of Spider-Man's television appearances, and a handful of souvenirs which can only be called unique. When I paid Tim a visit the other day, he eagerly opened his trunk to answer my typical nosy questions. I was real lucky to get some of those clippings, said Tim. I was just a little kid when a lot of these stories were printed, but my grandfather knew a lady who saved old copies of the Daily Bugle and a bunch of other papers going back a long way. So I was able to get clippings of the earliest stories on Spider-Man that were rare, that were ever run. So basically we see here, this kid here, he's Spider-Man's biggest fan. And Spider-Man shows up to meet him. He tells him, he goes, I happened to see that article about you in the Daily Bugle, and I just couldn't pass up a chance to meet such a faithful fan. Can I see your collection? So the kid shows Spider-Man all the stuff he has, his souvenirs or whatever. So then he starts asking Spider-Man some questions, and we get a brief breakdown of Spider-Man's origin told. Spider-Man tells the kid through flashbacks. He says, I always wondered, how'd you get your powers? Were you born with them? And Spider-Man says, no, I came by my powers purely by accident. Believe it or not, I got the way I am from being bitten by a radioactive spider. So Spider-Man tells him the brief rundown of the incident. He shows him how his web shooters work. He shows him everything he can do with them. So you get a lot of, it's kind of like a huge info dump. He tells the kid he started out and the fame and the fortune went to his head. And so we see the flashback of the burglar shooting Uncle Ben. And Spider-Man tells the kid, if I had stopped that burglar when I had the chance, but all I cared about was myself. That's why I started chasing crooks. If I caught that burglar, I swore that no one else was going to get hurt if I could help it. Maybe you should have picked someone else to start a scrapbook about Tim. Tim says, geez, do you have to go, what does he say? Do you have to be so hard on yourself? So the kid is basically just saying, don't be so hard on yourself, Spider-Man. Spider-Man says, I'll be making up for that mistake for a long time. And we all know that this incident here, Spider-Man not stopping the burglar shooting Uncle Ben, that's the whole motivation Spider-Man has doing for what he does. So we have another little scene here where he sees some of the souvenirs that Tim's collected. Spider-Man gives him a breakdown of his powers. We see some more stuff here from the article where Tim talks about it in an article about how he got some of his souvenirs. Then he says here, the guy who's doing the interview, he asked Tim, he goes, does it bother you that Spider-Man rarely receives favorable headlines? And the kid says, a little, but it's given me material for a whole new scrapbook. So we see that no matter what the press says about Spider-Man, Tim doesn't care. He's head over heels, a huge Spider-Man fan. And then Spider-Man basically tucks him in, tells him good night. And as Spider-Man's walking away, Tim asks him, he goes, will you tell me who you really are? And Spider-Man says, I can't tell you my greatest secret. If people knew who I am, I couldn't get no peace and quiet. All my friends, people that know me, would be in danger. And the kid says, well, look, I'll never tell another soul that I know. Honest. Spider-Man says, I know, but I can't. Then he sits there and he thinks about it and he turns around and he goes, Tim, my name is Peter Parker. I took most of those photos to go with those articles you see. And Tim goes, you mean all these years old man Jameson has been paying you to take pictures of yourself? And Spider-Man says, yep. And he says, I know. You can't tell, though. You can't tell. He says, I understand. This is going to be our secret. So this is wild. This is shocking that Spider-Man has told this kid who he really is. And he says, well, I guess we're buddies. This makes us buddies then. We're going to be best friends forever to the end. And Peter, you can see he tells him, he says, hey, it's starting to get late now. I need to go. Timmy says, good night, Pete. Wishes him good night. Pete says, take care of yourself, Tim. And we see Spider-Man swinging away. And then we get this beautiful shot here. He's swinging away. He's swinging away. He lands on top of the wall that's outside where Tim lives. And we see here, it's a cancer clinic. And then down here at the bottom, we see the last part of the article. And it says here, you see Tim Harrison has leukemia. And the doctor has only given him a few more weeks to live. So basically, that kid's not much longer for this world. And that's why Spider-Man told him who his identity is. You know, because that was the least he could do. You know, Spider-Man knows for all his powers, he can't save this kid from leukemia. But what he can do is he can be his best friend for the night while he's still here, and make him, you know, just give that kid one hell of a memory that he'll have and can take with him or whatever awaits him next. And this story is by Roger Stern with art by Ron Frenz. And like I said, this is a great story. And it is an incredibly powerful story. But it is not one that you're going to see in some sort of greatest lists story, you know, greatest recommendations. You know, it's not up there with, the death of Gwen Stacy, the death of Jean DeWolf, you know, Maximum Carnage, Maximum Clonage, you know, Superior Spider-Man. Because it's a simple, human, emotional, one-off story. And those are the best kind. And that is why, as a long-term fan, it really makes me sad sometimes that we don't get these type of stories anymore from the big two. At least not in the main titles. You see them more in books like the red, white, or the black and white anthologies, or the red, white, and black anthologies, or whatever you want to call them. You know, the Spider-Man or the Venom or the Deadpool ones or whatever, or the Batman black and whites. That's where we get those now. We don't get them in the ongoing titles anymore. And there's that I feel like that is a missed opportunity. It's opportunities like this that allow fans to, you know, this is a type of story. It slows down it breaks up the storylines and the events, and it puts some, you know, human, it's like a humanitarian type of story. It is a humanizing story for Spider-Man, for Peter Parker. It shows us that even though he is involved in all these events with Green Goblins and Dr. Octopuses and Mysterios, that he still has time for kids like this. And it humbles him. It humbles him. And it's something that we don't get in our main books anymore. And that's a shame. I remember I was on Reddit for about a year, probably about maybe 2 or 3 years. And I would see people post reading, they wanted to know, they would say things like, give me all the essential Spider-Man stories in order. Don't tell me any of the one-shots, the one-offs. What are the best storylines that I need to read? And that's all they wanted. They just wanted, you know, all the collected editions, all the essential storylines for Spider-Man or for Green Lantern or for Batman or for whoever it was. You know, they didn't want to. They just wanted to get it like it was a. I always say that they wanted to experience comics like those old CDs. Now that's what I call music. You know, they just had greatest hits on there, just the radio hits. You know, none of the tracks that's on a CD that were great but just didn't get radio play. You know, that's all they wanted was just the bangers. They didn't want anything that flew under the radar, you know. And that's where you get your character development, your interactions, your humanizing of them, and you get gems like this sometimes. You know, the boy who collects Spider-Man. You know, if you had to ask for the most highly recommended Spider-Man stories, that's probably in 2026. That's probably not going to be mentioned in you know, a lot of lists. You know, it's going to have to be a top 25 or a top 50 list before you get to that. And we're missing out on these type of stories today because today's fandom doesn't really want these. I always say that people want to play. They want to treat comic books like it's a video game. They want to treat it like it's Doom. They don't want to treat it like it's Dungeons and Dragons. And when I say that, what I mean is they just want the running, the gunning, the action, the fight scenes. They don't want the character interaction. They don't really want as much of the downtime, the socialization, the supporting cast. You know, they just want to go, 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 storyline, event, you know. And that's just, it's just kind of bums me out sometime. But if you want to read this story here, highly, highly recommend picking up this solo issue. It's one of the great standalone Spider-Man stories. Like I said, The Boy Who Collects Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man number 248 by Roger Stern, art by Ron Frenz. Give it a shot, and it'll hit you in the feels. So till next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good night. Bye-bye.